Good evening. Welcome to the first televised debate in the Democratic race for mayor. I'm Errol Lewis, coming to you from the Gerald Lynch Theater at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in Manhattan. Tonight's debate is going to focus on topics related to public safety, and I'm joined by NY1 criminal justice reporter Dean Meminger and NY1 Noticias political anchor Juan Manuel Benitez. We'll be asking questions of the 6 candidates that you see here. 3 John Jay students will also join us in posing questions during this hour-long debate. Let's introduce the candidates now in alphabetical order. Sal Albanese, Bill de Blasio, John Liu, Christine Quinn, Erick Salgado, and Bill Thompson. Now, folks, because of the number of candidates, there will be no opening or closing statements. In addition, not every candidate will be asked to respond to every question, and that goes for me, for Dean, and for Juan, and that's in the interest of time, and also so that we can get to as many questions and answers as possible. For the student questions, each candidate will be able to respond, but you'll have 1-minute time limits for each of those questions. So let me start with the first question for the candidates, and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Folks, the recent bombings in Boston have reminded New Yorkers of the constant need for vigilance against terror attacks. One unfortunate truth that we have learned over the years is that preparation requires constant work, everything from ensuring good communications and cooperation between first responders to ensuring that anti-terror surveillance is done in a manner that's consistent with the constitutional right to privacy. This question is for Speaker Christine Quinn and for Bill de Blasio principally. I'll allow others to respond as well. Please identify an area where you think the city could be doing better at protecting our city from terror attacks, and tell us what specific steps you would take to improve things. And we'll start with you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. First, I just want to say I think the NYPD has done an outstanding job as it relates to keeping this city safe from terror attacks, having thwarted about a dozen or more attacks and assisted the district attorneys and the FBI in arresting alleged terrorists. Now, that said, you're absolutely right. Fighting crime and fighting terror, it's not like taking care of roads, that you pave them over and then wait till there's a pothole. It's a constant work. You have to be at it every day, and you have to be constantly reevaluating what you're doing. So we need to build on our strength, kind of from strength to strength. A couple of areas where I think we could make additions is one, I gave a speech today where I called for the city to purchase more mobile cameras. We now have the technology to have cameras that can be moved about. This really is going to help us have more eyes on the street, A, and B, criminals and terrorists are never going to know exactly where the cameras are, which is a real aid in making sure people know or believe they could be seen anywhere. 2, we have to figure out better ways to use technology. One of the things I want to call for is an app that could allow people in the kind of see something, say something, to text what they see, a picture of it to the police department. 3rd, every terror expert I've spoken to, regardless what side of the political spectrum they're on, would tell you a key to fighting terror, yes, it's enough police officers. Yes, it's cameras and technologies. But it is based on community police connection, that you can't do it without having a real voice from the communities that are out there. Lastly, we need to think a little more broadly about who our first responders are. We need to have the Department of Sanitation, the Department of Transportation, the MTA workers all go through focused anti-terror training so they can be more skilled eyes out there to assist police officers.
Mr. de Blasio.
Thank you, Errol. I think, first of all, the events in Boston unquestionably were not only tragic, they were sobering, but the response of the first responders there was extraordinary, and I think reassuring to us all. And I dare say we have the most sophisticated and effective first responders in the entire country here in New York City. So the first thing we have to do is protect the strength we have. We have a police force now, over 34,000 officers, and that number cannot get any lower, no matter what fiscal challenges we face. I think that's a line in the sand we have to respect. The 1,000 or so officers we're applying to anti-terrorism responsibilities, that number also has to be kept stable. But I think in terms of your question, what can we do better? Well, one part of me thinks it is about greater use of technology, and some of the technologies we've seen that identify both folks who might be involved in terrorism and everyday criminals, like ShotSpotter technology, I think we can make greater use of, and that will make our policing resources used more efficiently. But I think, pulling out one point from Speaker Quinn's response, I put even more stock in the notion that you have to have the right relationship between police and community, that you have to have the right communication, that the intelligence gathering is the key to stopping terrorism, whether it's abroad or here in the United States. And so I think we have a lot more work to do to bring the police and community together in this city. I think, in fact, there's a direct connection between overcoming some of the problems that have been created by the overuse of stop and frisk and making sure that we have a closer communication between police and community in every kind of neighborhood. I think when we have that partnership, that is part of the long-term path to safety and security. I also think that when you have that partnership, police are freed up to do the most important investigatory work, not caught up in quotas and other systems that take them away from the best work they can do.
Okay, let me invite some of the other candidates to weigh in on this, and keep in mind issues like stop and frisk will, believe me, be addressed. But I do want to stick to the issue of public safety from the point of view of preventing terror. Sal Albanese.
Well, I think that we have to commend the New York City Police Department for the job they've done since 9/11. The anti-terrorism team, the 1,000 cops, are the best in the world, and we have to maintain that. They've done a superb job. I've called for the hiring of 3,800 more officers to assign them to patrol to help to make sure that we don't erode patrol strength in the city, and also help us build a rapport with the community, which is essential. But the other thing that we have to focus on is the New York City Fire Department. They're a major part of the anti-terrorism effort. You know, the Bloomberg administration closed 6 firehouses 2 years after 9/11. That's a mistake. They've also reduced staffing in the engine companies. As you know, in 9/11, they played a major role. They paid a heavy price. So we have to make sure that not only the police department, but the fire department plays a role. They're an important part of our anti-terrorism efforts.
I think that NYPD has done a great job of keeping us safe from terrorism this past decade, certainly after 9/11. But it's not just the NYPD. There are other agencies that should have a more proactive role as well. For example, we have seen the mass transit system be a target not just here in New York City, but in other major cities across the world. And so the MTA has to be far more proactive, not only in hardening the assets against terrorist threats, but also basic things such as allowing communication systems to actually work in the subways. To this day, in 2013, it's still appalling that in the city of New York, you cannot communicate for the most part when you're in the subway system. That has to change. It has to be a priority. It's not just about the NYPD. It's also about all the other agencies that have a great deal of responsibility to keep people safe.
And as mayor, what would you do about that?
Well, that's something that the MTA needs to increase their capital plans for. They have long called for installing cell signal service in their subway system, in the tunnels as well as platforms, and yet to this day they are moving at a snail's pace, even though immediately after September 11th that was already identified as part of the MTA's capital priorities. We've got to get them to do better, and the mayor's representatives on the MTA board should be pushing that.
The government #1 responsibility is to keep all the inhabitants of the city safe. And my priority under my administration is going to be so. Therefore, I'm not going to allow any cuts on the fire department or the police department. In fact, we had to raise the police number to 37,000 at least again. Right now, we have around 34,000. That's the same amount of police officers that Mayor Dinkin had when he was in office. It wasn't acceptable then. It is unacceptable now. We also have to concentrate that we have to identify and register more than 6,000 to 1 million undocumented immigrants that we have in the city. This is going to be a good tool for the police officers to be able to understand that many of these people, they are great people, they are living here, they are around us, like Mayor Giuliani said, they are here, they're going to remain here, but we are giving like a blank check to them because some of these people might get engaged into this criminal behavior, and the police officer, they don't even know where they live. We have to treat these people decently. We have to make sure they are identified. We have to make sure they are registered, and we have to make sure that everybody in the city is actually accountable for the act.
And just to be clear, you're saying that's something you would have the NYPD do?
We're gonna push for a program that is gonna work together with the NYPD, and we're gonna give that piece of tool to the NYPD to make sure that they identify all the inhabitants of the city of New York. It's unacceptable that we have more than 1 million people living among us, and we don't know where they live, who they are, and but we know they are here. So we have to make sure that everybody get registered in the city of New York. Thank you.
Thanks, Errol. I think that to begin with, I've called for, going back to the number of police officers, 37,000. When you think that back in 2001, we had 41,000 police officers, and right now we'll have a little bit more than 34,000. We need to have at least 37,000 police officers out there on the ground as part of a kind of a new era of community policing, out on the ground, in the communities, talking to people, working with them. That will lead to increased safety across the city of New York. It will allow our police department to, again, be part of the community and have the community be part of the police department. I think that goes a long way to adding to safety and security, being able to let people know in the community, let the police department know when there are problems. And one last thing, if we look at the days after September 11th, those dark days, everyone was part of being vigilant. And it seems some of that has faded. As we look at security forces in private buildings across the city of New York, they were part of that grid also. They were part and being trained in some places to pay attention. We need to maintain that level of vigilance in involving everyone in making sure that New York City stays safe.
Errol, can I just jump in for 1 second? Because with all due respect to Mr. Salgado, I just don't want to leave on the floor the statement that seemed to imply that immigrants or undocumented immigrants were a terrorist or are a terrorist threat in this city.
I didn't imply that at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that
Because
we
that's
have
what
to
I
make
took
sure,
from what you said, and I just want to
I
forcefully
implied that we have
disagree.
to make sure that everybody registered in the city of New York. If we want to keep the city safe, we have to make sure that everybody's registered.
Okay, all right. Then I want to thank you, candidates. We kept it right within the time frame that we're looking for.
Wow. That could be a first.
Yeah, and it won't be the last. Let's hear from one of our students. Going alphabetically, the candidate responses are going to start with Sal Albanese and go right down the row, and end with Bill Thompson.
Good evening. My name is John Cusick. I'm a senior here at John Jay. Across the city, people have extremely different views about Police Commissioner Ray Kelly. As mayor, would you keep him on as part of your administration?
Well, that's great question. I think that it's irresponsible for us to make any declarations about who the police commissioner is. We have to do our due diligence when we take office. And some of my opponents are playing political games with this. For example, Mr. de Blasio wants to fire Ray Kelly, but he didn't bother to fire 2 of his staffers who tweeted out, "Kill the cops." New York City needs a mayor they can trust on public safety.
I think it is necessary for each of us, John, to give the people a sense of what we would do in office. And I have immense respect for the NYPD. I've worked closely with the NYPD as council member, as public advocate throughout my career. But I think I can say at the same time that Commissioner Kelly has done, at the same time I can tell you I respect him. I think he's done a great job on many levels. I think there are things that he's made serious mistakes with in terms of not just the overuse of stop and frisk, but the general disconnect between the police and communities in many parts of this city, which I think is corrosive to the long-term public safety needs of this city. And I think you have to be able to say, after someone's been in office 12 years, that it's time for someone else to come along. We have some world-class choices out there who I think could be great police commissioners, but I really believe this in my heart. You can't have long-term safety and security if too many people in this city feel uncomfortable in their relationship with the police. I'm talking about law-abiding people. Remember, in the case of stop and frisk, 90% of those stopped law-abiding by the police own statistics. And I go one step further and say, we need to, in this city, pass legislation to ban racial profiling. I know Speaker Quinn came out today and said she will allow a vote on that bill, which is important, but that she disagrees with the bill. I think we need that bill as another step towards healing and strengthening the relationship between police and community.
We'll have an opportunity to talk about that. John Liu, 1 minute. Thank you.
So the quick answer to your question, John, is no. I would not retain Commissioner Kelly. But in all fairness to the guy, because we get this question on almost a daily basis here. in all fairness to Commissioner Kelly, I don't know if anybody's actually asked him if he wants to stay on as police commissioner. I mean, after 12 years, it's been a pretty grueling run for him. But I'm looking to bring in my own people all across the board, across every city agency. Specifically when it comes to the NYPD, it's not just the commissioner. It's also the top ranks of all the chiefs who, in my opinion, have served a long time. They've given a lot of service to the people of New York City. It's probably time to move on and bring in some new people. I think we've got a deep level of bench strength in the NYPD. Younger but experienced leaders who are ready, willing, and able to step up to the plate, assume greater responsibilities in the NYPD. And at the end of the day, when we allow newer people to take on additional responsibilities, I think you will see not just the police commissioner, but the top ranks of the chiefs there will be greater diversity. And the chiefs will actually start looking like the people of New York City. And when that happens, I think there will be that much greater confidence that people have in the NYPD, and the NYPD will be able to do its job even better.
Okay. I'm being told from the folks, this is for the people watching. We've got some technical difficulties, but we're going to resolve them momentarily. Some camera angles. Don't worry about it,
Okay.
candidates. Christine, Quinn.
Well, John is right. Police Commissioner Kelly, I don't think has asked any of us if he could stay, and none of us have asked him that. That said, I have said, and I stand by it, I think any of us as mayor would be lucky if Ray Kelly stayed on as police commissioner. He's brought crime down to historic lows, 419 murders last year. That's the lowest murder rate since they started keeping statistics in 1963. That's juxtaposed to when we were the murder capital of the world, and it's juxtaposed to places like Philadelphia and Washington, where crime is going up. And remember, crime began to go down not under Mayor Giuliani, but under Ray Kelly's first term as police commissioner. And when crime was going down in the Giuliani administration, it was going down nationally. This trend now in New York is against the grain of other cities across the country. Now, that said, I don't agree with Ray Kelly, or most people for that matter, on everything. And when I'm mayor, if he or anyone else who's my commissioner, they'll work for me. And if there's practices like stop, question, and frisk that they are overusing, that'll stop. But let me also be clear on the racial profiling bill. Profiling is illegal in the city of New York, and it's something we all need to have zero tolerance for. I know we'll talk about the bill later, but I just want to be clear on that point. Thank you, John.
The problem is not so much the commissioner. The problem are the politicians who give the order to the commissioner. So I will keep my option open. I will consider Ray Kelly if he's available. If he's not interested, maybe I ask Rudy Giuliani to come and serve as police commissioner. Or I ask Rabbi William Hander to handle everything in the city. We have to be tough, and we have to make sure that the best person is going to keep our city safe. We cannot go back to the New York from the 70s or the 80s. We have to move forward, and that's very important in my administration.
Thank you.
John, thank you for the easy question that you've thrown to the panel here. But first thing, Reverend, I'm going to have to make sure that I oppose as far as I oppose Rudy Giuliani as the police commissioner for the city of New York. Let me go on record. Let me go on record against that right away. Look, John, I think that Ray Kelly has done an excellent job as police commissioner in the city of New York. But there comes a time when people need to move on. I think it's important. I want to bring my team, my group of people to the table. It's going to be a team that's going to make sure that we keep crime down, because that's my responsibility. That's the thing that I need to do, is to make sure that New York City stays the safest big city in America. We can't sit back and rest on our laurels. We need to continue to push crime down. We can do that with a mayor who's focused on that, with a mayor who understands that the bonds between community and police have become frayed in some ways because of the excessive use, the misuse of stop and frisk. So I want to bring my police commissioner to the table, a new commissioner, a diverse group of people who will represent the entire city of New York. Nothing against Ray Kelly. It is time to move on.
Thank you.
Can you mention a name, Bill?
And thank you, John.
No name?
Okay, let's
Not
turn to our panel. We're going to start with criminal justice reporter Dean Meminger.
Well, stop and frisk, we're talking about that, so it's perfect for me. Maybe you didn't speak to Ray Kelly, but Ray Kelly, the police commissioner, appeared on NY1 on the road to City Hall Monday night, and he sent a question for you. He said, what would you do tonight to stop a teenager in the Bronx from getting killed? Unfortunately, just 2 hours after he made that comment, a 17-year-old was shot and killed in the South Bronx. The following morning, broad daylight, a 22-year-old was shot and killed. If stop and frisk is banned or changed, what ways, in a concrete way, would you get guns off the street, guns that are there now? I want that question for Bill Thompson, Christine Quinn, and John Liu. Let's start with you, Mr. Thompson.
Dean, the first thing, I think it is, I mentioned before, it's important that we increase the number of police officers who are out on the street. We need to raise the police force up to 37,000. That's number one. Number two, it is important that we bring back, really, or go to a new era of community policing. That's important. Increase those ties between the community, between the police department. They'll start to tell us as they start to trust the police department more and our officers who will be on the ground and in the communities. Community residents will start to let them know who has the guns in the neighborhood, how we can get those guns off the streets. Third, stop and frisk. I haven't said abolish stop and frisk. Stop and frisk, when used correctly, is a useful policing tool. It is being misused and abused. When you have 700,000 people in the year 2011 who were stopped, who were 90% of them were black and Hispanic and young men and innocent. When you misuse stop and frisk like that, when you tie it to performance goals, then there's something wrong. Also, there are a couple of other things I'd like to.
Well, we can't give you a couple of other things, but go ahead, one more thing, and then we have to go on.
Two other things, quickly, and I'll condense them.
Okay.
They're bargaining here.
Experience as we look
They're
at,
haggling
as
over
we
it.
look at neighborhoods that have suffered, from an increase in crime or more difficult neighborhoods, more experienced officers in those neighborhoods. That's important to do also. And last but not least,
10 seconds.
High Point. As we look at that, the High Point policing strategy that's been used across the country, it helps to drive crime down when it comes to drugs and young people. That's another thing, as well as deterrence in a number of ways.
Quinn. First of all, I think we have to keep the numbers in our police department as strong and robust as possible. If you look at the number of police officers we are going to lose soon, senior officers through attrition, we can hire 1,600 new entry-level officers with that same amount of money. We need to do that right away. To start that rolling, I've called for us accelerating the police class that should start in January to July 1st. That's critical. Those officers then need to be sent out in a way where they're targeting neighborhoods where that young man was tragically killed, neighborhoods that are highest in crime. The Operation Impact model needs to continue in that sense. We also need to use, as I said before, the mobile cameras can help with terror. They can help with traditional crime as well, particularly targeting neighborhoods that still have too high a level of crime and too high a level of gun violence. Now, I also have not called for an end to stop, question, and frisk, but you simply cannot have stop, question, and frisks happening that are outside of the constitutionally approved context. They've gone too high. And if you actually look at the point in a graph when crime was going down most significantly, it was not when stops were at 700,000 across the city. So the construct that they are what is keeping us safe, the data does not bear that out. Beyond that, we do need to engage aggressively, particularly with youth offenders, in focused deterrent programs. And there's models out there that work very well where the police go in to young people that they know have engaged in crime and basically offer them a choice.
All right, let me ask John Lugo. Answer that question, and I want to get the three other folks to answer the question as well.
Some people like to think that they're being politically correct by calling it stop, question, and frisk. The problem is when you ask people, mostly young men, they will say there is no question in the procedure. It's just stop and frisk. So let's call it for what it really is, stop and frisk.
And how would you get the guns,
and
guns
let's talk
off
about
the street, though?
Well, let's talk about focused deterrence. This is something I've been calling for a long time. Focused deterrence, where the police are working closely with community members and leaders, identifying where the worst elements in the neighborhood are, and focusing police resources on the bad guys, instead of assuming almost everybody is bad and stopping all of them, and then finding out that actually almost no one who stopped is actually doing anything wrong. So your question is, well, go back to your question. If stop and frisk is working so well, how could another young man
I don't know if I said that, but...
But that's what happened, right? So the murder, unfortunately, still occurs. This past year, we saw a dip, that's true, But if you look at the 10-year rate, it's actually, the pattern over the past 10 years, it has not subsided that much. It certainly is not correlated with the huge escalation in stop and frisk. The problem with stop and frisk is that it has gone too far out of control, and the amount of division it has created between police and communities is making it more difficult for cops to do their job and making it less safe for everybody.
All right,
And then finally, I just have to say something.
I can't give you a finally.
No. I think everybody else got a lot more time. I just want to say one thing about the racial profiling. Speaker Quinn says that racial profiling is prohibited in the city of New York. Unfortunately, stop and frisk in New York City is the biggest form of systemic racial profiling we have anywhere in the United States of America, and it has to be ended. It has to be ended.
For Erick, Sal, and Bill, let's start with you, Bill de Blasio. In terms of quotas, people complain that there are quotas and that's why you have stop and frisk. How would you make sure officers are doing their jobs out there? Because the police department says it has performance evaluations and goals to make sure officers are working and not just chilling out on the corner. So they need to be out there doing work. How would you make sure officers are working if you're not looking at numbers?
I believe if police officers are freed up to do their job and precinct commanders are freed from the burden of a quota system, you're going to see more actual policing. I have heard this from cops on the beat. I've heard this from precinct commanders. They feel that a stop and frisk driven quota system is keeping them from doing their job properly. Listen to some of the tapes that came out of the recent federal trial. They're chilling. And it's not about policing anymore. What the model of community policing is the maximum number of cops on the beat, the maximum number of cops who stay in a neighborhood for a long enough time to actually develop relationships, local commanders with the freedom to apply those officers as they see fit. All of those approaches will help you find the guns. A good relationship between police and community will help you get the intelligence you need to stop the criminals. But the overuse of stop and frisk has taken us in the wrong direction. And one fact that's crucial, there was a movement in this town last year to start to bring down that number of stop and frisk. From 2011 to 2012, a 20% reduction in stops, a 30% reduction in violent crime. There's evidence right there. When police can do actual policing, it makes us safer.
I want to try to make sure the two others get a chance. How would you make sure officers are doing their jobs? How would you evaluate them?
Well, Dean, resources matter. I was on this public safety committee for 15 years. I spent an awful lot of time on patrol with officers over that 15-year period. And I remember where there were 1 or 2 cars in precincts on the street, and crime was rampant, and I led the fight to put more cops on patrol. So that young man that you described needs more officers out there. That's why I'm calling for hiring officers, because our patrol strength is eroding. As it relates to stop and frisk, we live in the United States. No one should be stopped in violation of the Constitution. I have a 3-pronged effort to address it, which places an emphasis on quality rather than quantity. For example, I want to see intensive training of officers. I want to hire 3,800 more officers on patrol so they can build a rapport with the community. And thirdly, I want to stop wasting money on marijuana enforcement. I want to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana so that we can focus on violent crime and also bring down stops.
That's interesting. I don't know if that answers the question about how do you make sure officers are doing their job, but Mr. Salgado, go ahead.
I don't see marijuana like a solution for stop and freeze, but I definitely will concentrate in increase the level of police officer. Stop and freeze is an inexpensive way to enforce the law. If they stop and freeze everybody in New York City, then we're not going to have crime, period. And if they put everybody in jail, then we're not going to have crime, period. We have to concentrate in increase the police officers' number to 37,000 again. We have to have the big cop in the street, engaging with the community, knowing the different custom, culture, learning about who's Spanish, who's Dominican, who's Puerto Rican, who's Guatemalan, who's Mexican, who belong to different community. We definitely have to increase the number of officers. We have to make sure that they have the sociologically education to engage with the different community that we have. And believe me, 4 weeks ago, I got stopped, and I said, I'm running for mayor. And he said, shut up, go back in the car, sir. And thanks God I didn't get freeze. He asked at the end, he shake my, I'm Latino. It's not so sweet, stop and
You're
freeze.
Latino,
Believe
okay.
me. No es nada bueno, stop and freeze when you're Latino, okay?
All right, very good.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Thanks very much. And I'm sorry to hear about what happened to you, sir. Let's move on. It's time for a second question from a John Jay student. We're going to start with Bill de Blasio this time, go down the panel, and end with Sal Albanese. Marisela.
Good evening. My name is Maricela, and my question is, reports about the mishandling of DNA samples from criminal investigations, especially in rape cases, have undermined public confidence and jeopardized criminal investigations. As mayor, how would you ensure that the evidence is handled accurately and efficiently?
Maristella, I appreciate the question because I think this is part of a bigger set of things we have to do to create real trust and confidence between the people of the city and everyone they come in contact with from government, but particularly when it comes to the area of public safety. I think the funding hasn't been there. I think the oversight hasn't been there to make sure that all evidence is treated properly. And I think, bluntly, there's been a problem further, which has to do with the need to do greater training of a lot of folks who work for the city in how to handle these situations sensitively and compassionately from the beginning. I think there's too much experience in this town of women who have been victimized, treated like their claims are not real, and not encouraged and supported along the way. We saw even a case, a very shocking case earlier this year, including some off-duty officers. So I think this takes reform on many levels, both how we handle physical evidence, but also the kind of training we do.
I do believe that we should rely on DNA evidence, but the funding is not there. They don't have necessarily the resources to ensure that all of their procedures are rock solid and airtight. And so the resources the resources must accompany the use of DNA testing and also sampling. But it's also about credibility. And credibility when it comes to victims not being treated well. I think over recent years, the city has done a far better job of treating victims with far greater respect and not interrogating victims along the way, as opposed to treating them as what they are, victims. On the other hand, we also have to make sure that when mistakes are made, that the criminal justice system adjusts to it and makes amends for that. And so the case that I'm talking about is unfortunately a case that has been a terrible, terrible episode in the city's history. And 24 years ago, a young woman was attacked, brutally attacked and raped in Central Park. And that sent the city into an uproar. And that was horrific. Now that young woman, I don't know if she'll ever recover, but she has come forth and she has talked about her ordeal. But that ordeal led to 5 young men paying many years of their life in prison as the price for something that they did not do. And it's been more than 10 years since the DA's office has essentially exonerated them. And the city still has not claimed ownership for that mistake. So it's about credibility on both sides. And if we're going to use evidence, especially high-tech evidence like DNA sampling and testing, then we've got to make sure that the resources are there and procedures change if a change is necessary or indicated to be necessary.
Thank you. Marisol, thank you for your question. And I think one of the overarching things you're referring to is the recent real scandal at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, where it came to light that there was at least one staff member at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, ACME, who had mishandled DNA evidence. And what we don't know from that is, were there other people who committed crimes who we might have apprehended? Were there people who were convicted who shouldn't have been convicted? It leaves a terrible, huge questions, and it leaves the potential of victims being re-victimized. Now, in response to that, a couple of things have come to light that we now understand. One, there clearly wasn't enough random checks going on of the different level staff within the Chief Medical Examiner's office. And it was clear that the supervisorial structure in the Chief Medical Examiner's office wasn't tight enough. They're committed to change that. We obviously have to follow up on that, particularly since we're getting a new chief medical examiner. But what we also found out was that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner wasn't following in every case the tightest national and international standards around pathology and DNA. They've committed to change that. But we also found out is when they were reporting to their monitoring entities what was happening that was a problem, they weren't reporting transparently. So there was no way for the city council to know that or the public to know that. They have now committed that all reports that get sent to their monitoring agencies as pathologists and medical examiners will be shared with the council, which we will share with the public. We can now stay on top of this to make sure nothing like this ever happens again.
Thank you.
I believe that we have to ensure that all the professionals that are working in this department, they are actually reliable and fit for the job. My God, my heart goes out for many women that are fearing for their life, and they wait so long, and they rely on this piece of evidence, and then all of a sudden, they don't have the respect or the treatment that they deserve. And I believe that is something very important that we have to analyze and make sure that the people that are working, especially now that we depend on that to make the difference in many people's life, we have to ensure that we have the right people working there. And for women that are fearing for their life in this city, I know that the current administration, they try to emphasize more in the statistic, but many women are fearing for their life, and I believe that under my administration, we have to make sure that they are protected, and they fear for their life. It's going to be easier for any single woman or woman who are actually fearing for their life to get a pistol and protect themselves as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marisol, thank you for your question. I think that first, DNA and the use of DNA these days is a centerpiece of policing, a centerpiece of criminal detection and investigation. If we can't guarantee that there is accuracy and safety there, we undermine the entire system. So we have to make the commitment first in making sure that the dollars are there. We can't accept less. That's not an area that you can cut back in. That's not an area that you can skimp in. You have to make sure that we make the commitment of dollars there first. Secondly, we have to make sure that the guidelines, and that everybody is aware of the guidelines, from the police officer and the investigators all the way down that chain, to make sure those procedures, everyone understands them. There is no mess-ups. People understand exactly what has to occur. Making sure that the training and go along with those guidelines are there, and that everybody is well-trained and very informed. And also, it is the oversight when people know that someone's looking over their shoulder, when people know that we're not going to accept mistakes, when they realize that it is that important, then people tend to get it right. So it is all the way up and down that chain. We have to make sure that women are protected. We have to make sure that we get those criminals off the streets by using DNA. It is the wave, not of the future, it's the wave of today. We have to make sure we get it right.
Thank you. Sal.
Great question. DNA evidence has become an essential tool in criminal justice, and it's clear that there's mismanagement and there's a lack of resources there. And one of the things I always complained about when I was a city council member is the fact that the council has oversight responsibility to really do an awful lot of research in terms of what's going on in these agencies. And quite often what happens is, because it's not politically sexy to do oversight over the medical examiner's office, it just goes ignored until there's a crisis. And now, of course, everybody's upset about it. So I would urge the council to be more proactive and do the proper oversight so we don't wait for a crisis and we have a miscarriage of justice. You see what's happening in Bronx County. People are going to trial 4 or 5 years after they've been indicted. I mean, 180 days is the law, and we're not addressing that. I mean, talk about miscarriage of justice. People forget evidence, police officers forget, and people that are guilty are found innocent and what have you. So we have a lot of gaps in our criminal justice system. It's about oversight and it's about resources. But if we don't have a fair and objective criminal justice system, it'll be a debacle for the city and the state.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisol.
Thank you.
Okay, our next round of discussion is going to be led by my colleague Juan Manuel Benitez. Juan.
Thank you, Earl. And it's going to be about oversight. It has become one of the essential issues during the campaign, whether to create a new office, an inspector general, to oversee the role of the NYPD, its practices and policies. Is it, and many of you spend some time at City Council, is it this apparent need of hiring a new person the result of City Council not doing its job, Mr. Thompson?
Could the City Council have provided more oversight over the last 4 years, 8 years? Sure, that could have occurred. At the same point, we wouldn't have the concern, because IG and the discussion about the IG is more a response to stop and frisk. If we would have had a different mayor in City Hall, to be honest about it, if I would have been the mayor of the city of New York, stop and frisk wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't have to address that. If we had a different police commissioner, stop and frisk wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't have to, we wouldn't have this problem right now. To be blunt about it, if we hadn't changed term limits, we wouldn't have this problem right now. So to be honest about it, there are so many things that, that the council may be passing legislation, but if you had a mayor who said, not in my watch, we are not going to have profiling, we're not going to have stop and frisk being misused. If we had a police commissioner who understood that, we wouldn't have the problems right now.
Thank you. Comptroller Liu, do you think it's the result of maybe City Council not doing its job?
Yes, to some extent it is, but to a greater extent, it's an NYPD with respect to the leadership under Commissioner and the mayor that has led to the problems that then led to the calls for these inspector general positions or the bill for that. I think that originally my position on the inspector general was that it was part of a broader package, the Community Safety Act, that I thought would enable police and community to work closer together so that everybody would be safer. Now there's only the talk of instituting this inspector general position. I think it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the root causes of the problems that we're facing today. The racial profiling that's going on, whether it be stop and frisk that has gone clearly out of control, or the unfair surveillance by the police of certain people in the city. It's the racial profiling that is the root of the problem. Let's get rid of that, and there won't be as many calls for this inspector general. And then the other thing is we got to make sure that our officers are equipped to do their job. Again, it's about working with the community. But you have so many different directions and people that are trying to impose certain guidelines on these police officers, and at some point, they're going to lose focus. We want them to stay focused, and we want them to stay focused with the community.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, it's your city council. And also, there's a contradiction because you want to keep Ray Kelly, but at the same time, you want to hire someone to oversee his work, basically. Is there a contradiction there?
I don't believe there's a contradiction there at all. First of all, obviously the City Council does oversight of the police department, but our Public Safety Committee looks at a number of different issues, not just the police department, and also, as well as oversight, has budget and legislative functions. The thing about an inspector general, it would be a person or a unit who this was their sole focus all of the time, looking at policies and practices of the police department. Now we're talking about stop, question, and frisk, but it could be any practice at any time that's going on in the department. And the Inspector General would issue reports and recommendations to the council, the police commissioner, to the mayor, the public, about how the job could be done better. Congress has oversight over the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, but the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security both have inspector generals. Both of those entities and Congress believe that the inspector generals have helped Congress and those entities do a better job. The Los Angeles City Council, of course, has oversight over their police department, but they have an inspector general. And a year after they instituted it, crime went down 33%, and approval from the community of the LA Police Department went up to 83%. This is about bringing an additional resource that can help us analyze on a constant focus, singular focus, policies and practices that can help all of us do a better job. And look, I think Ray Kelly's done a good job, but all of us can always do a better job.
Thank you, Mr. Albanese.
Well, the last thing the taxpayers need is another entity to oversee an agency. The city council, and I'm an expert because I was there for 15 years, has the subpoena power, should be doing the oversight. So there is no need for an IG. When it comes to public safety, people have to be able to trust you, that you can keep the city safe, and they have to know where you stand. For example, one of my opponents, Bill Thompson, is all over the lot. Last week he was for the IG, this week he's against it. I have no idea where he is today. I still don't know.
I'll let you answer in a minute. Thank
And
you.
after what Christine Quinn did with term limits, how can we trust that we're an important topic like public safety?
Okay,
Sal?
Mr. Salgado.
Excuse me, just one thing in response to no, Sal. I've been pretty consistent in saying that an inspector general within the police department reports to the commissioner and the mayor makes sense. It provides for transparency. It provides for, review of policies and procedures. But the one thing I'm not going to concede, the one thing I'm not going to give away, as the mayor of the city of New York, and that's why I say it needs to stay within the police department, as the mayor of the city of New York, I'm going to be responsible for keeping the city of New York safe. I'm not going to outsource that job. I'm not going to give it away to a second police commissioner or a second mayor. I'm going to be responsible and accountable for that. That's the difference. And we may have a disagreement there.
It's
That's
my
my
turn,
let me-
guys, my turn.
Let me get Mr. Salgado.
Yes, it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Excuse me, Reverend. Excuse me.
¿Qué está pasando aquí?
Excuse me.
Okay. I don't think we need to add to the current bureaucracy another position. I think that the commissioner, he needs to be elected well. We have to choose the best person for the job, and we don't have to select another person to blame. The bottom line, the mayor is the one responsible, and I believe if we create a new position like the inspector general, it's just using an excuse to get somebody to blame. And the bottom line is that the mayor is responsible and the commissioner is also responsible. If the commissioner is not working well, then we have to replace it.
Thank you, Mr. Public Advocate.
Yes, Juan Manuel, there's been definitely some variations among some of my colleagues' positions on this issue. I'm very proud to say that I came out in favor of the Inspector General bill and called for a strong version of it with subpoena power, with independent budgeting, so the Inspector General can maintain their independence. And I have continued in that position because I believe it's needed to make sure we have real accountability. Look, stop and frisk went from about 100,000 stops in 2002, the first year of Michael Bloomberg's administration, while crime was going down, went up to 700,000 stops by 2011. There was no vote by the people of the city. There was no referendum. There was no legislation in the city council. It happened all without people realizing the sheer extent of the proliferation, except we started to hear more and more from the community level. What it was doing to the relationship between police and community, the frustration, the anger, the sense that innocent people were having their privacy rights violated, the sense that young men of color in particular were having their dignity violated, and it was sending us in the wrong direction. But the mayor didn't stop it, the police commissioner was the author of it, the city council didn't stop it. So this is an object lesson of why we need serious oversight. Almost every major American city has either an independent review board or an inspector general. As you heard, CIA, FBI. There is a reason for checks and balances, and had we had an inspector general, we might not be in the danger we are right now in federal court of having the federal judiciary step in to dictate some of the actions of our police department that should in fact be our decision to make.
I just want to give Madam Speaker a quick rebuttal because Sal Albanese mentioned you.
I did.
If you want, if you want.
Absolutely.
You don't have to take it if you want.
The issue of the
You don't
city
want.
council's record on stop, question, and frisk, I think is very clear. The only reason we know the numbers is because of law passed by the city council that requires documentation and reporting from the police department.
Okay.
The only reason there has been retraining of police officers is advocacy by me and the other members of the city council. The only reason that the statistics the police department keep around stop, question, and frisk has changed is because of the council, and the only reason the Civilian Complaint Review Board now has prosecutorial authority is because of the oversight and work of the council. The IG will build on our work. It doesn't replace it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from another student. This is our final student question. We're going to start this time with John Liu, work down the panel, end up with Bill de Blasio. I'll urge you in your responses, folks, to use the lights that we have set there for your 1 minute
We
responses.
started off so well.
Sally.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sally, and my question is in reference to domestic violence. In 2011, the NYPD conducted more than 73 home visits related to domestic violence, which is a 91% increase since 2002. As mayor, what would you do to reduce domestic violence in New York City?
Domestic violence is a scourge that unfortunately still permeates too much of our city. And it's an endless cycle of violence that we have to stop at one point. So the police, they have resources to combat domestic violence, but I think it needs to be more. There needs to be greater work with community-based organizations who, quite honestly, many of the victims of domestic violence trust more so than they would the police. The issue, the problem of domestic violence is particularly acute in immigrant communities here in New York City, where oftentimes the abuser uses the immigration status or the threat of reporting to hold extreme power over the women or the people who are being abused. And so that is a fundamental change that I think we need to have here in the city. The police, I know they have increased they have redoubled their efforts to help victims of domestic violence and have instituted programs to prevent it in the first place, to break the cycle of violence. But there needs to be far greater partnership and collaboration with community-based organizations who have the expertise in communicating with victims or possible victims and bringing them out so that they are not fearful and continue to be subject to this endless cycle of domestic violence.
Thank you.
Sally, thank you for the question. And domestic violence is one of those just cancers in our society, and we have to do everything we can to stop it. The police department have expanded their focus on it, and that's a good thing. And I would continue that, and that's part of the reasons why I want to accelerate the police class, bringing 1,600 more officers so we don't lose any resources here. Two, we recently made a structural change in the police department where domestic violence is now also part of the Special Victims Unit, which is important because often rape and sexual assault is committed in a domestic violence context, and we need to understand that dynamic even further. The comptroller is absolutely right. Community groups, service organizations play a critical role in helping us combat domestic violence. Before I was elected to the City Council, I was actually the director of the New York City Gay and Lesbian Violence Project, a crime victims assistance agency where we serve same-sex victims of domestic violence. And often victims will first go to a culturally competent community group, not the police. We need to keep that strong. Lastly, we recently put in place an effort with the police department, kind of a see something, say something type idea, adding neighbors, friends, co-workers to step forward if they think someone's been the victim of domestic violence. That's an important way we can have the community help us and help us turn victims into the survivors we know they are.
Thank you.
I believe that domestic violence, it is a big problem in this city. I'm married for 21 years to my spouse, Sonia. I have 6 beautiful children. And as a pastor and a community leader, I see most of these victims come forward and speak to me and tell me what's going on. We had to focus on the undocumented immigrant community, which I defend so much and I respect so much. And because many of these victims, they are not coming forward because they are so afraid. We have to make sure that these cases are handled by the local police enforcement, because most of the victims, they are afraid that if they report the husband to the police officer, they're going to deport him and they're going to lose him in a way. So we have to make sure that the perpetrator stay in the city and pay for whatever crime he did, and that he had to support the kids. He's not going to go back and forget about all the children that he have over here. That's one thing. We also have to handle U visa for the undocumented immigrants that are victim of this crime, because they are like trapped in this city. They are abusing the house. If they go out probably and seek help, they're going to be deported or they're going to be abused by somebody else.
Thank you.
We have to make sure that we provide you. I haven't spoken so much, so. We have to make sure
we're
that
on a
we
very
provide,
strict time schedule. We did say 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, U visa, and also make sure that we have safe houses for them to escape. Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay.
Sally, thanks for the question, and by the way, and thank you for all the help that you've been providing today. You've done multi-things and multitasking. Thank you so much. The first thing, and let me give the New York City Police Department credit for as far as they've come. You know, we need to make sure that we look and make sure that there is zero tolerance for domestic violence. And I think that the best way to do that is by working hand in hand with our community-based organizations. They're the ones, particularly a number of the immigrant organizations across the city of New York. I think as you look, there are different communities, and part of the training for police officers has to let them understand that different communities respond in different ways. In some communities, almost no matter what happens, no one will come forward. No one will speak out. No neighbor will say anything. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. Working hand in hand, training our police officers to know what to understand. But also, again, I talked about community policing. It is important to maintain those relationships and have those ties. It is also, in a number of different ways, one of the big concerns, and let me just talk about it for a second. There was a memo that came out a few weeks ago. I believe it's been rescinded by one of the higher-ups at the police department, who indicated that when the police make a stop, when they go to someone's address based on a domestic violence call, that they check both individuals to see is there any outstanding warrants and things like that. I believe that was pulled back. We can't do that. That sends a chilling message to so many people and to women. Don't report things if you have a problem, and it leaves them to be the victim of domestic abuse. We need to make sure that New York City maintains that zero tolerance for domestic abuse. Our police department is well trained, and they work in conjunction with our nonprofit organizations.
Thank you. Sal.
Well, great question. Domestic violence is a problem. It's growing, and as the economy tanks, those domestic violence rates go up, which unfortunately is part of the pressure in a home when you don't have a living wage job. But the people who commit these crimes have to be prosecuted. The police do a pretty good job, even in tough cases with orders of protection, where they have to respond and save an awful lot of lives. However, they've made some great suggestions, and I agree with many of the things that need to be done. In terms of reaching out to new immigrants, there has to be a cultural sensitivity. I was a school teacher in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and I worked with young kids. I counseled some, and they gave me a hint of domestic violence. We had a great community center called the Center for Family Life, run by 2 Franciscan nuns, and they stepped in and they worked with the community and the entire family. They did wonders. So those community-based organizations are essential. The police can only do so much.
Well, first of all, I think we have come a long way, but there's definitely more work to be done. I commend the police, but look, 10 years ago, I was in the city council. We passed legislation I authored to provide emergency shelter for victims of domestic violence, because the city in some cases wasn't providing shelter if the women involved didn't have the right documentation. You know why they didn't have it? Because it was back where the batterer was. We had to change that to make sure the law favored them. We passed legislation out of my committee to provide accommodations for women in their workplaces who were victims of domestic violence, so they wouldn't be in a public place and exposed to batterers. I think community policing in general is part of the solution, closer relationship between the police and local communities so they can have that trust. So I think there's a lot we can do. Just one other quick point. I have to note what I thought was an extraordinary act of revisionist history on the previous question. Speaker Quinn, the fact is you only moved on stop and frisk because there was tremendous public pressure. You weren't willing to challenge Ray Kelly previously, and you only moved on Civilian Complaint Review Board because, again, other people were moving on the issue. Councilman Garodnick and I went to you years ago on it, and you said it wasn't something you were willing to take up. So let's be clear and not act like this is something you've been committed to long term.
Errol, I have to
Very quickly.
Yeah,
very
I have
quickly,
to correct
please.
the record. Bill, you are engaged in revisionist history. What I said to you and Councilmember Garodnick is that the piece of legislation you had to give the CCRB prosecutorial authority was not legally doable, and that instead the way to do it legally was between a memorandum of understanding between the police department and the CCRB, and that is what we achieved through my work with Dan Garodnick and others. So you're simply making that up, and my record on the issue of stop, question, and frisk, whether it's getting trainings changed or getting the way CompStat is conducted changed, is very clear, and I'm incredibly proud not only of having worked with my colleagues to get that memorandum of understanding, and now the CCRB has prosecutorial authority. Also in last year's budget, we put in millions of dollars to make sure they could hire those lawyers to do that prosecution.
10 seconds. for
Councilman Groddick and I called for independent budgeting for the CCRB and strong, clear prosecutorial power. You did not say that at the time. It was very clear you were not willing to challenge Ray Kelly on it, and you still have not supported independent budgeting for the CCRB.
We're going to have to leave that conversation for another time, but that concludes tonight's debate in the Democratic race for mayor. I want to thank all of the candidates. And a reminder to voters, primary day is on Tuesday, September 10th, and the general election is November 5th. New York 1 and the Road to City Hall will be providing extensive coverage of the campaign, as well as the many other races on the ballot. I'd like to thank the staff and students of John Jay College, and President Travis in particular, for letting us use the Gerald Lynch Theater. Thank you, and good night.